Good evening. Stand up straight for a moment. Yes, actually straighten your spine, because tonight we are talking about dragons, and dragons, real or imagined, sniff out postural weakness the way wolves scent blood. When I was 6, growing up in the bald-headed prairies of northern Alberta, my father took me to a slough to fish for jackpike. The reeds were higher than my head, the mud sucked at my rubber boots, and the whole place stank of prehistoric doom. Suddenly something exploded through the surface, 3 feet of needle teeth and green armor. I dropped the rod and bolted. My father caught me by the hood of my coat, lifted me off the ground, and said, "That's not a monster, son. That's just a fish with an attitude problem." Then he put the rod back in my hand. I didn't know it, but I had encountered my first dragon, a composite creature stitched together from instinct, imagination, and the unknown. And I also didn't know that the decision I made in the next 30 seconds would write the prologue to the rest of my life. 1. The dragon is a map, not a territory. Look, the universe is not made of quarks and billiard ball atoms. It is made of what matters, and what matters is what threatens or promises. The amygdala in your limbic system does not do statistics. It does better safe than sorry. So it manufactures dragons, shadowy predators that lurk at the edge of the campfire. The academic name for this is hyperactive agency detection, but the experiential name is being human. The error we commit is reification, treating the map as the territory. We label the chaos dragon, and then we behave as if the label exhausts the phenomenon. But a dragon is not an ontological entity. It is an epistemological event. It is the border between what you have mastered and what has mastered you. Step across that border voluntarily, and the dragon dissolves into information. Refuse the crossing, and the dragon grows scales, wings, and eventually a mortgage. 2. Slayers are made, not born. Courage is not a gene, it is a practice. You don't have it, you do it. When I was teaching at Harvard, a student came to my office hours trembling because she had to give a presentation on neuroticism. She was, ironically, catastrophizing about catastrophizing. So I gave her an assignment. Stand outside the library at rush hour and ask 50 strangers, "Excuse me, would you like to hear a 5-minute lecture on neuroticism?" She gawked as if I had asked her to juggle chainsaws, but she did it. 2 weeks later, she walked into my office upright, eyes shining, and said, "The dragon was me." That is how slayers are forged, one micro-confrontation at a time. You approach what you avoid, and the avoidance circuitry in your brain literally atrophies. The cortex thickens, the amygdala quiets. You become structurally braver, and the world registers the change because you carry yourself differently. People respond to the new template, and opportunity, frightened off by your former posture, now stalks you. 3. The treasure is in the tail. Here is a rule. The bigger the dragon, the larger the hoard. The thing that terrifies you most is the precise location of your gold. Jung called this the shadow. And the shadow is not a moral cavity. It is a treasure vault you have padlocked from the inside. I once worked with a middle-aged oilfield roughneck who could bench press small tractors, but who wept in my office because he was afraid of his own 8-year-old daughter. She asked questions he couldn't answer. "Why do you leave before I wake up, Daddy?" The dragon here was not the child. It was the unexamined grief of a man who had substituted physical endurance for emotional presence. When he finally sat at her bedside and told her, "I leave because I'm terrified I'm not good enough to be your dad," she patted his cheek and said, "Then stay and be bad at it. We'll learn together." The dragon turned out to be the gatekeeper to the only relationship that ever mattered. He now runs a nonprofit that coaches rig workers on how to read bedtime stories. The treasure was always in the tail. 4. Speak the dragon's name. Chaos is transformed into order through articulate speech. That is the logos, the word that turns the void into the world. When you can say exactly what you are afraid of, the fear shrinks to the boundaries of your sentence. Try it tonight. Write down the thing you are most unwilling to discuss. Give it a name, a date, a place, a body count. Watch the emotional valence drop. The dragon hates proper nouns. Specificity is kryptonite to the monstrous. That is why totalitarian states always throttle language first. If you can't name the dragon, you can't slay it. Conversely, that is why psychotherapy works. 2 people sit in a room and keep talking until the unspeakable becomes speakable and the speakable becomes manageable. 5. Carry the fire back to the village. The ultimate aim is not individual conquest. It is communal integration. You do not kill the dragon and mount its head on your wall. You mine its gold and distribute it before the next sunset. Otherwise, you become the very predator you defeated. So here is the call to action. Tonight, Go home and identify one dragon you have been feeding with avoidance. It might be a conversation, a medical test, a creative project, or an apology 30 years overdue. Schedule the confrontation within the next 7 days. Tell someone you trust what you are going to do. Speech externalizes commitment. Then execute the plan. When you survive, and you will, write down exactly what you learned and share it with at least one other person. That is how the village stockpile of wisdom grows. Remember, dragons guard gold, but they also guard the gateway to who you could become. And there is no such thing as a dragon once you have walked through the gate. There is only you, larger, fiercer, and more compassionate than you ever imagined, carrying fire in both hands, ready to light the next person's path. Stand up straight, shoulders back, eyes forward. The dragon is waiting, and so is the treasure. The dragon is a map, not a territory, means that every terror you feel is a cartographic projection of your own ignorance, etched onto the world by a brain that evolved to keep you alive long enough to reproduce, not to keep you accurate. The amygdala fires in milliseconds, far faster than the prefrontal cortex can veto, so it paints the unknown with a broad, bloody brush. Every rustle in the grass is a leopard. Every stranger is a cannibal. Every ambiguous email is a pink slip. Over time, those brushstrokes congeal into a scaly, fire-breathing gestalt that seems to live outside you, on the news, in the boardroom, in your father's voice. But it is actually inside your perceptual circuitry, a phantom topography superimposed on the real landscape like a faulty augmented reality headset. The moment you volunteer to walk into the very territory you have labeled "Here be dragons," the pixels reorganize, scales become data, claws become questions, sulfuric breath becomes the smell of your own adrenaline. You discover that the dragon's size is calibrated precisely to the circumference of your refusal. The more you avoid, the more detail the brain hallucinates to justify the avoidance. Conversely, every step forward collapses the waveform. The creature sheds limbs like a decapitated hologram until you are left standing in the swamp with a fishing rod, facing nothing more exotic than a jackpike who is, at worst, having a bad day. The dragon was never the thing in itself. It was the gap between what you knew and what you needed to know, a living question mark that grew fangs whenever you declined to answer. Slayers are made, not born, because courage is not a trait you inherit like eye color. It is a skill you install like software, one terrifying patch at a time, and the installation process is called voluntary exposure to the very circuitry that screams at you to freeze. The medial prefrontal cortex has to be trained to whisper down the amygdala, and the only language they share is repeated, controlled confrontation. You start microscopic. You speak one honest clause in a conversation where you usually nod like a puppet. You leave the house 5 minutes late on purpose so the punctuality dragon shrieks. You walk to the edge of the mall balcony if heights make your knees liquefy. Each micro-victory etches a new myelin sheath around the neural pathway that says, "I acted and remained intact," while the old avoidance highway is left to crack and weed over. The body keeps the score, cortisol spikes flatten, heart rate variability increases, testosterone quietly rises in both sexes, and your very skeleton remodels, literally, osteoblasts lay down denser bone when you habitually stand erect under threat. After 30 such reps, you notice strangers no longer glance away from your gaze. After 300, you volunteer for the presentation, the ski slope, the difficult phone call. The dragon you once saw on the horizon is now a training dummy you spar with before breakfast, and the part of you that used to beg for rescue has become the part that issues calm, tactical instructions. Courage is therefore not the absence of fear, but the accumulated evidence that fear is a prediction machine that can be hacked, overridden, and eventually reprogrammed into a targeting system that aims you at the next bigger dragon you have not yet met. The treasure is in the tail because the dragon's most venomous appendage is precisely where it stores the psychic gold you exiled long ago, every talent you disowned, every desire you branded shameful, every truth you swallowed to keep the peace. So when you finally grip that thrashing tail, you are holding the rejected fragments of your own totality. The tail is the shadow, the long muscular appendix of everything you refuse to integrate, and it grows scales and spikes precisely to prevent you from reowning it without paying the toll of terror. Neurobiologically, the anterior cingulate cortex registers social rejection and physical pain on the same dial, which means the shame you feel when you contemplate your forbidden appetites lights up the same circuits as a broken arm. No wonder you let the dragon guard them. Yet, the moment you run your hand along the barbed ridge anyway, The pain metamorphoses into information. Every spike is a memory of a moment you betrayed yourself to stay acceptable. Every scale is a talent you envied in others because you exiled it in yourself. The oil-field roughneck discovers that his fear of his daughter is actually the uncried grief of his own fatherless childhood. The poet who hasn't written in a decade realizes the dragon is the sentence, "Art is selfish," spoken by a well-meaning parent whose own creativity was stillborn. When you hold the tale long enough to read the braille of your own repression, the dragon begins to autophagously devour its own armor, and the gold that pours out is not metaphorical. It is the sudden energy that lets you work a 14-hour day without fatigue, the libido that returns overnight, the spontaneous laughter that erupts in the middle of a grocery aisle because the burden of maintaining the lie has been lifted. The tail, once the whip that kept you running, becomes the umbilical cord through which your exiled life force flows back into your bloodstream, and you understand why every mythology places the treasure at the farthest point from the hero's starting gate. Distance is proportional to denial, and denial is the only real currency the dragon accepts. Speak the dragon's name because unarticulated dread is a shapeshifter that expands to fill every grammatical crack in your inner monologue, a gas that can seep under any door, but the instant you pin it with phonemes, you convert the vapor into a solid object that has edges, mass, and, most importantly, handles you can grip to fling it out of the house. The left inferior frontal gyrus lights up like a forge when you generate precise nouns, and that neural activation is the biological equivalent of drawing a magic circle. The word is not a description, it is a container that forcibly shrinks the amorphous threat to the size of its own spelling. Say, "I'm afraid my spouse will leave if I admit I lost my job," and the fear collapses from a cathedral-sized echo into a 12-word sentence you can hold at arm's length, turn over, inspect for logical fractures, and possibly refute. The dragon's true name is always longer than its roar. The roar is "everything will fall apart." The name is "I am terrified that if I fail publicly, my mother will finally have evidence I am the disappointment she predicted at 15. Speak that sentence aloud and the amygdala's alarm curve drops within 6 seconds. Heart rate decelerates, cortisol output halves, and the prefrontal cortex regains executive privilege over the cockpit. This is why authoritarian regimes criminalize metaphor and poetry first. Tyrants know that metaphor is a skeleton key to the prison of unspeakable fear, and once the populace can say the emperor is naked, the empire dissolves into a punchline. Conversely, in the clinical room, the moment a sexual abuse survivor manages to utter the exact date, the exact room, the exact texture of the wallpaper, the trauma memory migrates from the limbic lava flow to the neocortical archives where timestamps live. The dragon becomes a file you can close instead of a flame that broils you awake at 3:00 a.m. Precision is therefore mercy. Every syllable is a nail that fastens the monster to the floorboards. Every clause is a cuff that lets you drag it into the courtroom of your own sovereign judgment and cross-examine it under the bright, disinfecting light of shared language. Carry the fire back to the village because the gold you rip from the dragon's hoard is radioactive with transformative potential, and if you hoard it in private, the same isotope that could heal your community will metastasize into the very arrogance that spawns the next dragon, turning you from liberator into tyrant, from David into Goliath with better weapons. The neural circuitry that rewards generosity and the circuitry that rewards survival are wired in parallel in the nucleus accumbens, which means evolution itself bets on the proposition that what saves the individual must be circulated or the species dies. The serotonin spike you feel when you teach someone else how you defeated your dragon is nature's receipt acknowledging the transaction. So you sit your younger brother down and show him the spreadsheet of micro-confrontations you use to overcome social anxiety. You post the exact script you use to ask for the raise. You read the poem about your father's alcoholism at the open mic, even though your voice shakes because every listener who dares to breathe while you speak is downloading courage into their own limbic firmware. The village is not a metaphor. It is the intersubjective network where unpaid debts of wisdom accrue interest as communal trauma. If you withhold the gold, the shadow you refuse to integrate becomes the next generation's dragon, bigger, scalier, and now wearing your face. Conversely, when the gold circulates, the collective risk tolerance rises like a tide. Crime drops, entrepreneurship doubles, teenage suicide curves flatten, and within 10 years, the library has a new wing funded by people who learn to name and claim their value because you demonstrated it first. The fire is not a trophy. It is a torch that burns at exactly 451 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to ignite the next heart, but not hot enough to cauterize the empathy nerve. And your final identity is not Dragon Slayer, but Firekeeper, the one who stands at the edge of the settlement holding the light so others can see the outline of their own beast, the eternal intermediary who ensures that every private apocalypse is alchemized into public infrastructure before the ash cools.
So here we are, at the last breath of this conversation, and the only question left is the one that has been circling overhead like a buzzard since you first sat down. Will you walk out of this room unchanged, clutching the same map of terrors you brought in, or will you take the next step, one real, physical, trembling step, into the swamp where the grass is taller than your head and something just went splash? The dragon you meet there will not be waiting. It will be summoned by the act of your arrival, coalescing out of the humidity of every sentence you never spoke, every risk you never priced, every apology you never offered. Look down at your hands. Those are the only weapons you have ever needed, because they can hold a pen, dial a number, grip a shoulder, or simply rise in the air to volunteer when the leader asks who is willing. The treasure is already glinting under the surface of whatever you are most ashamed to admit, and the village is already poorer because you have kept it buried. Speak the name, touch the tale, carry the fire. Do it before your knees stiffen into the permanent crouch of age, before the story you tell yourself ossifies into your epitaph. Stand up straight, shoulders back, eyes forward, and take the next irreversible action that makes the myth of the dragon obsolete. Because the only thing more terrifying than confronting the beast is realizing, too late, that it was never guarding gold from you, but you from the gold.